Yeah, well, the thief wants you to feel that your marriage is all about you and to not even understand God's greater plan and design for marriage. That's the first thing. The second thing is the thief wants you to live in shame and to blame somebody else for all the hard things you're walking through. And that's what shame does. Shame quickly pushes our attention away from us taking any personal responsibility and allows us to blame someone else. And our spouse will be the first person, the closest person to you, that's going to experience a lot of your blame.
What if you were able to sit down for lunch with some of the greatest leaders in the world? What would you ask? What would they say? Welcome to the Linch with a Leader podcast, where you're invited to join us in learning the spiritual principles behind big success. Here's your host, Mike Lynch.
What does it mean to fight for your marriage? That's what we're going to talk about on this episode of Linch with a Leader. If I've never met you before, my name is Mike, and it is an honor to welcome you into this leadership journey as we're all seeking to be the leaders that we were created to be in the spaces and places that God has put us. Well, today on episode 242, we get to sit down with a guy who I consider is a leader of leaders. Gabe Lyons has served as president of one of John Maxwell's organizations. He leads one of the most creative, thoughtful leadership environments for younger generation leaders called Think that is out there. And man, Gabe Lyons has been blazing a trail for years in the leadership space. And he and his wife, Rebecca, who also hosts the Rhythms of Life podcast, they both speak, they both travel the country. They are incredibly well known in all leadership circles through their books and speaking and conferences and podcasts and all the things they've done. I mean, in a lot of ways, I'm going to say this, they are a power couple out of Nashville, Tennessee. But in this brand new book, The Fight for Us, they unpack what was going on behind the scenes. What are the things they had to figure out to be the couple that God created them to be? From their foundational beginnings at Liberty University to who they are today, they've been through a lot. And I'm telling you, so many of you, you're excelling in your career, but man, the fight at home is going out. This book is going to inspire you, and this conversation is going to really encourage you. So I don't know where you're listening from today, but I promise you, there's something in it for you. And if you're going, man, Mike, I'm not even married yet. Good. One day you might be. So this is going to be exactly what you need. So get something to write with. I'm telling you, this is a good one. And I want you to pull up a chair. And I want you to listen in to my conversation with the author, one of the authors of The Fight for Us, Gabe Lyons. It's going to be a good one. Well, Gabe, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Linch with a Leader. It is an honor to have you.
Mike, so good to be with you too. Looking forward to it.
Well, you know, it's funny. Both of us have our roots in Lynchburg, Virginia. We missed each other just by a couple years there. Looking back at that time you had at Liberty, how foundational was that for who you are today, how you lead, how you work? Look back at those days.
Thanks, Mike. And so Lynchburg actually is my hometown. So not only did I go to Liberty there, I grew up in Liberty. I grew up at Thomas Road Baptist Church. Jerry Falwell was my pastor. I mean, so I grew up Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, hearing him. You know, he'd come in from some CN interview with Larry King, and he'd come in and share with the whole congregation Wednesday night what's happening in culture. So I do feel like I grew up in an environment where talking about culture and faith was just built in. I mean, it was baked in. We'd have Chuck Colson come and speak when I was 7. I remember that. Francis Schaeffer came, you know, early elementary years for me. So I was exposed to that conversation, and it was very natural for me to understand that faith did have a role to play in culture. So looking back, I'm so thankful for it. My parents sacrificed a lot to put me in a Christian school and my brother. And then we ended up staying and going to Liberty, which was an amazing experience. And Jerry ended up marrying Rebecca and I. So, you know, he was somebody that was a big part of our life in those years. And I think what it shaped in me was the power of vision, because as you know, that man's vision singularly to create a college campus, to just minister to people worldwide was just significant. I probably didn't appreciate what environment I was in while I was in it, but I certainly can say when I left Liberty and I ended up getting to work for John Maxwell for the next 5 years of my life, early early in my career, I was around these two visionaries. They both had different approaches, different ways they were putting energy into what the kingdom of God ought to look like on the earth. But it had a big impact, and I think set a trajectory and a vision for me where I felt like, hey, anything we can envision is possible with God's help. And I think that's been something I'm so grateful for, that heritage.
I think it marks all of us. And you go up to Lynchburg now and you're thinking, this is in the middle of nowhere. This massive university is in the middle of nowhere, and it is somebody's vision. They had a picture. We all got to be a part and benefit from that picture. And then people met each other up there. I met my wife there. You met Rebecca. Yeah. I know you've been on Shannon Bream. Her and Sheldon met up there. We go back. When you and Rebecca met and you fell in love, what did you think that life held for the two of you? When Doc was marrying you guys, where did you think it was all headed? And then what did you really learn?
Well, man, those years, you're just so excited, to move into marriage. I was 22, so we got married, right after college. And I think we both had just these rose-colored lenses, right, on life and what it would be like and having a family. It was all just picturesque. It was things you imagine. And I don't think I anticipated what challenges would come our way, of course. You kind of only look towards your future and imagine all the best possibilities. You very seldom look at traumatic events, or like for us, 3 years into marriage, we had our first son who was born with Down syndrome. And that, for us, was a shocker. We weren't planning for that, weren't prepared for that. It thrust us into a moment where we had to make a lot of decisions about how we're going to respond to this. Is this going to draw us close together or apart? The death of friends, family members, there's so many traumatic moments. I don't think at the earliest moment of life in marriage, most of us imagine that really will become some of the more crucial moments in your life and in your marriage that you'll walk through together. And so looking back now, Rebecca and I are in our 28th year. I'm so thankful that we had that vision, because I think you need that hope. You need a vision of how great life's going to be to then weather some of these storms and these moments together. But I can say the thing that connected and bonded Rebecca and I early in our relationship was shared dreams, shared vision about the future with God in it. And I will say I'm so proud of her. I'm proud of the work we've gotten to do together and the way that part of what we anticipated about life has been more than we ever imagined. And that's been exciting and fun for us.
You guys have a great new book out that is it is a must read, especially, and I know you've really written it and you guys have written it together, but you've written it for guys like me and you that, man, they don't want to talk about it. They just want to go, we're going to be fine. We'll get through it. But you really wrote it with a guy in mind because guys are so easy to push stuff off. Why do you think in your research and in what you guys have done working with couples through the years on your retreats even, why do you think couples go from all these shared dreams and visions to they're not fighting for each other, they're fighting with each other? Why do you think that's almost normal rather than abnormal?
Well, I'd love to just frame the perspective from a spiritual understanding of our marriages, how much they mean to God, to understand there is an enemy that wants that to be your existence and wants you to just accept that this is status quo. He knows if he can divide Rebecca and I, then that starts to impact everything. It impacts our kids, our relationships, our friends, the work that we do in the world. There's nothing worse, Mike, than you go off to work or you have to travel on a trip and you've just had some argument with your spouse and you leave feeling empty. You don't leave with the same fervor, excitement, enthusiasm, confidence, boldness, courage, that you want to be leading with in the world. And I know the leaders that you encourage through this, that's their experience. And that relationship with our wife is so crucial, I believe, to the confidence God wants us to have as we walk in unity into the world. And so I think what happens for us as men is what helps us to be successful at times in the workplace or in life in terms of pursuing results, in terms of measuring data, analyzing information, fact-finding, and then leading people with inspiration and vision. Almost all of those things do not work in how you're going to lead your wife. In fact, you have to really take those hats off and you have to start to understand that this marriage relationship, number one, my wife doesn't work for me. So her just following my lead on everything I say, is not how this is going to work. And if it does, sometimes that can lead to a lot of resentment. But taking time to really attune ourselves to the heart of the person that God's put us with, and to realize that when we come home from work, our first mission in the home with our spouse is to learn what their life has been like that day, to listen, to cultivate a relationship where we do take the time to understand what they're carrying. And Mike, this is something I've had to learn. Did not come natural. I would say for most men, this is not going to be natural. Like, we have to actually grow some skills here to be patient, to say, hey, my wife needs to unload the things that she's carrying. And many times it's not because she needs me to solve them. We've all heard that quip, right? That, Rebecca will always say, I've never heard a woman, when I've given them the option, are you looking for a listening ear or a solution? I've never heard a woman say they're looking for a solution, because in most cases it's a listening ear. And one of our counselors helped me understand that. He said, look, Gabe, when Rebecca needs to share with you what her day has been like, I understand that most of the information doesn't even feel that relevant to you. It's not actionable. She's not looking for a solution. You're probably wondering, why are we having 15, 20 minutes around this? But you have to understand, for her, even physically, to unload that emotion, to be able to put it onto you, because she's carrying this burden that she needs to get off of her chest and onto you as the husband. And when you do that, what happens is it's like a balloon releases. It's like all the pressure that she's feeling releases. And so I think as men, if we don't take the time for that on the daily, or if you're traveling, it's a phone call, it's taking that time. What happens is there's a built up amount of load that mentally and emotionally that our wives are carrying, that they're not going to be as responsive to us. They're not going to be as responsive to you initiating sex, for example. Yep. All the things that maybe men are thinking a little bit more about than maybe our wives, those things stop and cease unless we're being very attuned to her needs. And that took a while for me to learn. I did not grow up learning that at my Liberty University background. This was self-taught.
It's so funny. I just had Dr. Sholey on from the Brad Lomenick deal. Oh, my gosh. And so she said something that was really interesting, because we were about to teach on it at North Star. And she said, when the enemy did what he did in the garden, his goal wasn't just doubt, it was distance. And he wanted to create distance between Adam and Eve and God. As you guys, you're 28 in, how has the distance looked different for you guys through the years? You're early married. The distance feels one way between you and Rebecca. Now you're 28 years in. You're about to have a college graduate. It's a very different, the distance can feel different. How do we learn to recognize, man, there's starting to be distance between me and my spouse that didn't used to be there?
Yeah, well, I think she's right about this, because I think the enemy loves distance and loves just us accepting that as status quo. And saying it just is what it is. But that type of resignation is something that we have to confront in ourself. When you start saying statements like that to yourself, or, man, I bet other wives don't do that, wouldn't say that to me. I bet other husbands aren't dealing with this. Well, when we start saying these types of things to ourselves, what's happening is we do have distance. And what we need to do is confront that. We need to confront it first in ourselves and go, hey, this isn't healthy. Why am I doing this? Like, what am I doing in the relationship, or what can I do better? One of the things Rebecca and I write a lot about is this idea that we tend to scapegoat our spouse as the problem. We see the enemy is our spouse. We assume we're doing things perfectly and we're doing it great. They're the ones that are immature or too emotional or not realistic or don't know how to have a real conversation or whatever that gripe may be. And so I first like to call attention, especially to men, to say, look, take account of just what you're doing. How are you cultivating your wife's concerns, cares, loves, and take that step towards her. Because what distance does is it allows us to get comfortable living almost these two separate lives. And Rebecca and I went through a season, we've had different seasons in our marriage, but about year 19, we're in a moment where we both were pursuing, our work and good things. She was writing books. She's speaking a lot. I was leading our organization Think and doing events and conferences and speaking. And what happened was we realized distance was happening. So we were doing these noble things, but we were not growing closer together. And we had a good friend in our life that we've known since Liberty, since college, that we said, hey, we need a weekend with you guys because we're just feeling so disconnected. We know we love each other. We're committed to each other, but this isn't enjoyable like it once was. So will you guys just sit with us and can we process it? And so thankfully, over that weekend, we had some intense and good and healing conversations. And what it led to was Rebecca and I going and them advising us, look, the two of you need to cut some things out that you're doing and you need to start doing things together. You're both gifted, talented. You can do a lot of things. You'll always have opportunities to do things separate. But this next season is going to need to be focused on what do you do together. And that ultimately led to Rebecca and I doing a podcast together called Rhythms for Life that we're doing. We're 6 years into that. So a couple hundred or more episodes helping people think through as a couple, what does it mean to have a healthy life and relationship and their rest and their restoration, their connection, and so on and so forth. And then we started doing retreats together. It ultimately led, we wrote this book together. And so now Rebecca and I, most people would see us and be like, man, you guys are tied at the hip. Like, you guys hardly do anything apart. And that's not true. She's still speaking, and I still am leading an organization that she helps me with. But the reality is, because we've put such intention into staying connected through our work, that's been a big deal. The second thing I'd say, Mike, is we are religious about scheduling time together and making sure it's on the calendar and no one's going to get that time. And for us, every season's required a different type of timeline. Sometimes it was a date night. In this season, we have 2 special needs children in our home. We adopted a little girl named Joy. So these 2 beautiful kids are going to be with us for life. We don't get to empty nest. So we've had to look and talk with our mentors and go, okay, what's the strategy for us? And so one of the strategies we're able to do, and not everybody can do this, but we're able to block a lot of our Thursdays to say, hey, while the kids are in school, we've got 6 hours. We're going to block that. We're doing no meetings. We're not going to travel. We're going to actually have this time, just the 2 of us together. It doesn't require a babysitter because they're at school. And I will say, since we made that commitment a few years back, that has helped us stay connected, because we always know every week, no matter how busy we are, whatever we've got going, how stressful something might be, that we are coming back together every Thursday, and we're going to have a moment where we can just reconnect and have longer conversations that aren't rushed. And again, I know not everybody can do that. That's right. The schedule for everybody. But if you could just say, hey, we're going to have Saturday mornings. We're going to get up early and spend, 10 a.m. to 10 a.m. And we're going to tell the kids, we're going to let them watch a movie. I know somebody will be like, don't put them on digital. Well, we're going to prioritize our marriage so much so that we want our kids to know if we're not healthy, the family's not going to be healthy. And so I would just encourage husbands, take the lead in that. Your wives are longing for it. But take the lead in your schedule to say, hey, I'm going to actually prioritize this as much as I would prioritize the board meetings, the staff meetings, the one-on-one meetings I have to do, my prep for sermons or whatever it might be. Carve it out.
I love the intentionality of that and doing what works. I think it's the practicality of the book. There's not a perfect recipe everybody's going to do. You've got to make it for you. What has this process taught you most about you? What has the mirror shown you that may have hurt your feelings a little bit, and it may have hurt your pride a little bit as you and Rebecca have walked through this fight for us season in your life?
Well, I think for me, I did come into marriage feeling like emotionally I was probably stronger, had a higher EQ than Rebecca. And when we would get into engagements and fights or with other people, I sort of looked down on her in a condescending way, like, because her upbringing was just different than mine. And I just sort of assumed, well, she's going to keep growing in this area. And man, that pride, God just nailed me. I mean, it probably took 15 long years of marriage for me to understand how much baggage I had brought into the marriage, how much I wasn't willing to face difficult conversations. I was an avoider. I didn't want to open my heart up. I wanted to just keep a little bit of a wall there so I didn't have to share the deeper feelings, burdens that I carried, because it felt weak to me, because I'd grown up in an environment where tears, sharing anything that made you feel or look weak was bad. I grew up in an environment that encouraged me mentally to always think positively and to only see the positive. So to ever put time, attention, or words into something that was negative felt like it was just bringing me down, bringing her down. This wasn't helpful for our marriage. And God really used some good counselors, Becca's own emotional health journey, where I realized how much deeper her heart was feeling things than I was, to inspire, encourage, and then help me start to build some skills in learning better how to get in touch with my heart. I'd really shut it off. I was operating in my head most of the time, seeing my heart as more weakness. And I think what I've discovered is, no, the heart's everything. And our ability to feel and sense and show up for people, leading with our heart, is how we create connection that's deeper than just surface and stoic. And so I think for me, that's what I was confronted with, my pride, thinking it was a strength when I understood in my it was actually in our marriage, it was a weakness. I would say in business, it had shown fruit of being a strength, but I don't think it really was a strength. I think it kept me at arm's distance from people during those years. And I've had to relearn a lot about that in relationships.
It's so interesting. You brought up origins there, and you spend a lot of time in the book talking about who we are and what we come in with. I heard, I think it was Pete Scazzaro say, Jesus may be in your heart, but grandpa's in your bones. And it's true. and we both bring in stuff into the marriage. What would you tell? In fact, I'm walking off this call, jumping on a premarital right after a Zoom call with a sweet little couple. I'll be doing their wedding coming up. What do you think is important for every person to know before they say I do about what each other saw growing up, experienced growing up, and how that plays out for them today?
Yeah, it's such an important part of the ingredients of what's going to encounter your relationship and create the friction is understanding the origin story. And I don't think we were talking about it enough when I got married 28 years ago. I'm so thankful today that this is a good part of conversations where people understand, the simple phrase in psychology is if it's hysterical, it's historical. And I've talked to a lot of men who've got like, oh, that clicks. Like I didn't understand. I was talking to a guy yesterday. He said, man, that unlocked something in my marriage. Just that one understanding that when I'm overreacting, it's probably not about what we're talking about. Right. Many times it's like 10% of the reaction was what you're talking about. 90% is tied to something historical, either that your spouse has done that's hurt you, that you've never worked through or asked for or acknowledged, like, hey, this harmed me, this hurt me, and asked for forgiveness and work through that. But I think our story, when we go back and understand the home we were raised in, let's first of all not look back to become victims. I think that can be one of the downsides in our current culture is we look back to the origin story so we can blame somebody for what our perception and way of handling relationships is. Let's not do that. That's not helpful. We look back to just understand what are all the dynamics. Our parents were doing the best they knew how to do.
That's right.
My parents, they grew up in the silent generation. We didn't talk about feelings. That just wasn't part of the equation for most of us that are, I'm in Gen X, Gen X and younger. They weren't feeling that as much or seeing it. Today, it's a much more open conversation people are having. And so when you look back in your story, what you're looking for, what are the moments that were big turning points in my life that harmed me, hurt me, perhaps made me fear relationship or made me close my heart off because that best friend did something, said something, or I experienced something that dramatically shifted my feelings of safety or my sense of belonging in the world. And here's the beauty of that. When you can start to have that conversation with one another, and that's one of the things Rebecca and I do at the end of that chapter is present a few questions. Yep. So couples can, if they haven't had this conversation, they can at least on a date night start to get to know one another's story a little bit better. But as you're discovering that, what you're going to find is that I believe God's plan is he's put each of us together to become these healing agents that he will work through as part of you experiencing healing. So Rebecca's been a healing agent in my life for some of these areas that I grew up and I look back and go, man, there were deficits there that no one had met. And through God's love for me, through my spouse, I'm experiencing new things I've never experienced, and vice versa. I've been able to do the same thing for Rebecca. And so that's the beauty of going backwards to go forwards, is when we go backwards, we discover some elements that might be painful, but we're not alone in it. We know that that's God's with us. He was with us then, he's with us now, and we now have our partner there that can also help us process that. So it's not just something where we're living in our head, which many times can make it worse, but we're actually processing it with somebody, and now there starts to be some freedom in that.
You guys hit communication, you hit sex, you hit so many different hot topics that every couple, whether they ever let it out of the house, they're dealing with it. And they'll deal with it. If a couple's in their 20s, they're going to deal with it. And if they're in their, where we are, I'm 56, we're dealing with 33 years into marriage, still topics, still the same topics, all dealt with very differently. And you talk a lot about the thief who comes to rob us. I think Jesus talked about, the thief has come to steal, kill, and destroy. What do you wish every couple knew about what the thief wanted for their marriage and for their families? Because I think this is the underlying piece of all the stuff. What is it you wish everybody knew about what the thief's plan was for them?
Yeah, well, the thief wants you to feel that your marriage is all about you and to not even understand God's greater plan and design for marriage. That's the first thing. The second thing is the thief wants you to live in shame and to blame somebody else for all the hard things you're walking through. And that's what shame does. Shame quickly pushes our attention away from us taking any personal responsibility and allows us to blame someone else. And our spouse will be the first person, the closest person to you, that's going to experience a lot of your blame. And so we call that the blame game. And so I would ask you to consider, what are the things you're currently blaming your spouse for, that you actually feel you're better than them, and it's their fault that you're experiencing this. Many of the great writers, Gottman and others, Emerson Eggerichs, they talk about resentment leads to contempt. And contempt is when you think you're better than your spouse. So when you have those thoughts in your mind, like I'm better than her, you're starting to have contemptuous feelings. And they say it's a marriage killer. When you become contemptuous towards your spouse, you're looking down on them, you think you're better. That is the seed that the enemy will use to destroy a marriage. And so when we understand that the enemy's after that, we can just have it all out in the open and say, look, we know that's what he's trying to do. So I'm going to acknowledge and confess that I have some resentments. I know Rebecca and I, sitting with a counselor a few years back, I mean, we had a whole evening where it was a few hours of just being able to talk openly about things that we were hurt from years 3, 4, 7, 8 in our marriage. Moments where I felt alone and like she wasn't there for me, or vice versa. Things we just never talked about. The enemy wants us to keep all that covered up. He wants us to live with those secrets. He wants us to feel like, hey, if we expose this, then this is just going to hurt things more. And the truth is, when we actually speak truth, we confess these things, we ask for forgiveness, then God grants us, I believe, a fresh heart for one another, a tenderized heart that maybe feels like it's gotten hardened over time. And that starts to create new life and a new opportunity for our marriages to be resurrected, for us to have vision for a future that's actually better than what it's ever been. Your best days aren't behind you. We really believe they're in front of you. Yep. But Mike, I'm so glad you acknowledged at 33 years, like you still have tensions with your spouse. Yep. And this is normal for every couple. And I think so many younger couples don't understand that. They think, fighting means maybe I married the wrong person. Maybe they need to go get therapy and I'm fine. And we start to go down these destructive paths versus going, no, the fight is normal. And that's what Rebecca and I wanted to say in this book, The Fight for Us, is the fight is normal. There's reasons you fight, but there's a reason that we have to fight for each other and for the marriage as well, not fight one another. And I hope that encourages couples to know they're not alone, but B, there's a roadmap here. Like you can start to take a roadmap forward in better discovering how you can fight for one another. And we try to lay that out in all those specific ways: sex, community, your career and calling, how you deal with money, how you deal with parenting, and so on.
It's a great book. And I got to hear you guys share a little bit at Brad's gathering when you sort of impromptu jumped up and sort of shared your story of why community is so important and why you guys opening up your hearts is so important. And that's gutsy. You're both very public figures. Letting people behind the curtains is not always the easiest thing. And admitting that we don't have it all together like we may look like we have it all together. So I'm, number one, incredibly proud that you did that, because it's going to help your, I remember hearing the old Bible teacher Ron Dunn say years ago, that which is most personal is most universal. And it really is. I mean, you guys opening up the personal sides of your life has everybody like me looking in going, yeah, me too. That's where I'm at. So one day, and this will be my final question of the day, you guys are getting ready to go to a graduation ceremony for one of your kids. One day they're going to be sitting across from a pastor, and that pastor is going to look at them and say, all right, tell me about your parents' marriage. Tell me about what you saw in marriage growing up. What do you pray that your kids, your son, would look at a pastor and say one day, here's what I saw from mom and dad about marriage. Here's what I'm bringing into it. What would you say?
Yeah, such a good question. I think what I would say is that my hope is they would say, hey, I saw my parents have an intense marriage where there was always things going on that we were having to deal with and wrestle with. I saw them fight. I saw them get into these disagreements. But what I always saw was they repaired. What I watched was my parents turn towards one another, humble themselves, confess the thing that they did wrong, even talk to us as kids and tell us things they did wrong in front of us, so that it was an open environment for our family to acknowledge anything that was done or said that was wrong and ask for forgiveness. And I saw consistently a pattern of running towards one another for healing, for reunification, for connection. And as they got older, I saw that happening with a quicker timeline than I did when I was younger. I hope that's what they say. I think they would right now, is that, Rebecca and I's goal, we say to the couples, look, whoever apologizes first wins. So when you get in a fight, there's probably something you did or said or overreacted to. Think about, what did you do? And, the quicker person to pick up the phone, to humble themselves, to send the text, to say, hey, I really overstepped there. You're battling the enemy there. You're saying, no, we will stay united. I'm not going to let this get in the way. I'm going to humble myself. And so I hope they would say that, and they've experienced that.
Man, wasn't that relatable? Gabe and Rebecca just unpacked it. And I think so many times leaders of their caliber, it's really easy to hide that stuff. And they laid it out. Why did they do that? to help you and me be the best we can be. And that's what great leaders do. And they understand that their vulnerabilities and their weaknesses may be the things that teach us the most. And I am sure better for reading the book. I hope you will get the book if you haven't yet, not just so you can read it, but for your marriage. It's worth fighting for. I promise you that. As a guy who's on into the third decade of being married, it gets better, but it takes fight. And it takes sticking in there, and it takes hanging in there. So such good stuff. So if you enjoyed this, man, this is one you definitely want to share with a friend, a coworker, your mate. Man, leave a rating and review. That always helps us as well. And always hit subscribe on each of the platforms, because it does help get this to you and get it to your inbox so you never, ever miss an episode. Well, in our next episode, we're going to talk to a great leader named Dave Kraft. Dave is going to blow you away. In fact, there's a point in our conversation, Dave tells me how old he is, and I'm in shock. I have no idea, because he is so on point. He talks about leaders who last. And we just unpack not only his leadership journey, but a lot of his writings and a lot of his books and a lot of the study he's done and leadership he's done through the years. And man, I want to be a leader that lasts. This was one that really resonated with me, and I hope it will you too. Well, once again, thank you for joining us today. Now, go be the leader that God created you to be in the space and place he put you. And let's love God, let's love people, and let's live sent. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Lynch with a Leader podcast with your host, Mike Lynch. If you enjoyed this episode, you can help more people hear it by subscribing and leaving a review wherever you may be listening. For full episode notes and more spiritual leadership resources, visit MikeLynch.com.